I want to step into our teaching time now, and we've been in a series called Relationships on the Rocks. We have taken a couple of pauses to talk about good examples that we see from some of the people that we're introduced to in the book of Genesis, because there are some relationship positives, some positive examples for us to imitate, but there's a lot of strife and a lot of dysfunction. And so this week we're looking at another element that invites dysfunction into our families and our relationships, and we're trying to learn from their mistakes so we don't have to walk through the same issues that they walked through, right? That's a part of what Scripture is there for, the Bible is there for, is to teach us from other people's examples, positively or maybe negatively. And last week, just to give you a quick recap, we talked about jealousy. And there was a jealousy that ignited a rivalry, a sibling rivalry between two women, Leah and Rachel. And Jacob, who became both of their husbands, he was deceived into marrying both women. And there's more of a story to that we talked about last week. But as a result, both of these sisters started to compare themselves with each other. And Leah, she was fruitful. She had several children, but she was forsaken. She was neglected by her husband, Jacob. On the other hand, Rachel, she was somebody who was cherished by her husband, but she was childless, and so that was a badge of dishonor in their community in ancient times. And as a result, they started competing with each other, trying to fill in the holes that each person lacked. And in the process, they lost concern for each other. Presumably, at one point in time, they had a good relationship as sisters, even. They cared about each other. But all this competition threw that care out the window, and Rachel tried to strive to outperform Leah to gain happiness, and Leah tried to strive to gain honor, and then Leah strived to outperform her sister to gain happiness, and they're focused on what they can get instead of what they can give to each other, and things just spiral downward from there. But the interesting thing is that in spite of this jealousy and this rivalry, God still pays attention. He still listens to both women and continues to give each of them good gifts. They're just too focused on what they don't have to notice. And sometimes that's how jealousy works in our lives too. We focus on the things that we lack and we forget the good gifts that God has brought into our lives. And so we learned some lessons from that. So hopefully in our relationships and our families, we can avoid that pitfall of jealousy. And today we're going to turn the corner a little bit into arrogance. Maybe you look at yourself and say, well, I'm not a very prideful person, so I don't really need this today. Again, we're going to do a dive into what that actually looks like, and maybe it does play out in our lives in ways that we had never realized before today. As we get into this conversation, we're looking at Joseph, and this character in Genesis 37, he's going to start belittling his brothers. In this case, he's the younger brother, so he's actually putting down his older brothers, which of course you can assume goes over really, really well, right? And so here's a word that we're going to encounter. I like to do these important Bible words and phrases certain weeks. You're going to come across the phrase, some of your Bibles say a long-sleeved robe, some say a coat of colors or a robe of many colors or something like that. And this is just talking about a robe in ancient society. It either reaches out to the extremities. That word's a little bit ambiguous. So it's either talking about a really long-sleeved robe that stretches down to the bottoms of your ankles and feet. It's a robe that in other places in the Bible is used in a royal context. The king's daughters wear these robes. It could also mean a robe that has a variety of colors of fabric, but it's something that's a status symbol. So think luxury brand today. This is something that's going to set Joseph apart from his brothers, and we'll see how that plays out. And maybe it plays out in our lives as well. But we're going to see arrogance take three different forms in Joseph's life, and maybe it's taking one of those forms in our lives, even unbeknownst to us. And maybe as a result, it's causing some relationship turmoil and conflict. We want to notice that so we can maybe make some corrections and not experience the same strife that Jacob and Joseph and their family experiences as a result of this arrogance. So we'll look at criticisms first. So it reads this way. At 17 years of age, have any 17-year-olds in the mix here? Probably too many today. Anyway, so he's almost an adult. He's a younger brother. Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. So Jacob at this point has 4 wives. Again, another part of the story that we talked about last week as a result of this competition that ensued. And he brought a bad report about them to their father. So just again, see how this is playing out. A teenage Joseph goes back and he tattles, essentially, tells his dad about all the irresponsible personal decisions and actions that his older brothers are making. And of course, maybe his father entertains those thoughts, but if you're one of the older brothers and word comes back to you that your 17-year-old kid brother has been criticizing you, talking about how irresponsible you are, again, you can see how that might go forward. So I want to ask this question at this point. How might we criticize the irresponsible actions of our family members? Some of you, you're adults. Maybe you're in your 60s, 70s, or 80s now. And so this looks differently. Maybe it's toward your kids or even your grandkids or towards each other. Maybe you're younger, and so it's an adult criticizing another adult sibling. Or maybe you're a teenager yourself or a preteen, and so you're criticizing your brother or your sister and how irresponsible they are in different ways. It can take different forms. So if you're younger, it might be something like, hey, Mom, did you know that my sister came home after curfew last night? You told her to be in by 10:30, and you went to bed at 10, but she didn't get home till 11. Just thought you should know that. Or the last time you asked my brother to babysit us, do you realize he just spent time playing his Nintendo Switch the whole time? He just said, do whatever you want. I'm going to be in my room. Don't bother me. Right? Or, hey, did you know that she said she's not going to church this weekend? She just doesn't like it anymore. She's 15 now, too cool to go to church. Right? You're just sowing those little seeds in. I'm the better one. I'm the responsible one. My sibling is not. And then as we grow up, it might take different forms. I just thought you should know that, she's been posting pictures of the kids online again. One adult sibling telling an adult parent about the other adult sibling when the parent thinks, oh, that's not unwise in this day of the internet, and too much information. I just thought you should know, my sister's being irresponsible again. Or, my brother told me he wasn't going to help with Dad's medical bills, right? It's all going to fall on me. Or, did your daughter ever thank you for sending that really nice birthday gift along a couple of months ago? Or, I don't want to trouble you. Like, your son's been drinking a lot more lately, I don't want to cause problems, but just saying. Did they invite you to come over for the holidays this year? Because they didn't invite me. Those kinds of things, right? We just want to cast criticism and irresponsibility on somebody else. But a lot of times our criticism, at the heart of it, it can be arrogant. Now we're going to switch into a different section of possible arrogance. That's our clothes, or maybe our, different types of accessories that we have. Now, Israel loved Joseph, so Israel's another name or nickname for Jacob, Joseph's dad. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age. And he made a long-sleeved robe for him, special, designer brand. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and couldn't bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. So how did the brothers realize that the father loved him more than them? The coat, right. You get the idea when you read this story that this wasn't just something that brother Joseph pulled out for special occasions. He wore it often. In fact, later on in the story, when Jacob sends him up north to find his brothers who are shepherding some sheep out in the field somewhere, a couple counties away, he wears this fancy, elaborate, expensive robe just to go hike through the country and locate his brothers. You get the idea that this is a part of his wardrobe almost every single day, right? He wears it because he knows that it shows his status. He has this luxurious robe, and he doesn't just wear it sometimes or for parties or special occasions or when he's by himself or when he's with his parents. He wears it in the presence of his brothers to flaunt his superior value, his superior worth to his dad and the family. And maybe sometimes we don't think of fashions or other things as a way to flaunt our superiority. Maybe we just want to kind of project it. I was kind of insecure as a young teenager. And so when I was 14 years old, I remember this one moment. We had school pictures. And so I had just received, at that point in time, Michael Jordan was like at the pinnacle of his basketball career. And so I had this Air Jordan shirt and these Air Jordan shorts and this little gold chain necklace, which again, this is the early 90s. So at that point in time, maybe it was cooler than it would be today. But I was decked out in all this gear for my photo, from my ninth grade school picture. Because I thought if I wear this, it's going to project that I'm somebody important and it will mask all of my insecurities. So it's not always arrogance that's behind us, maybe flaunting wealth or luxury. Sometimes it's just we're trying to make up for our insecurities. And so that can also be a motive that we have. But sometimes, again, it is pride that's behind those types of things. Here's another observation from this. What type of impact does this robe, this status symbol, have on his relationship with his brothers? It's negative, right? And so this status symbol actually separates him from his less privileged brothers, right? And it's a cause for discord, for strife, instead of for peace. And it's a reality sometimes that if we get too involved in status symbols in our culture, that it can sometimes actually distance us. It can put barriers between us and less privileged people. And it can also be a cause of strife, and it can decrease the amount of peace that we experience in life. So we just need to be aware of that. Let me throw this question at you. What are some, and this is one I want you to respond to, what are some status symbols in our society that might project pride? Again, it's not always pride. It could be insecurity or some other things that are motivating it. But what types of things out there, if you own it and you flash it and flaunt it, might project pride and actually separate you from more common people around you and maybe even cause a lack of peace? What are some things you can think of that might cause those separations? Yeah? Okay, maybe it's a luxury vehicle. And again, I'm not judging your motives. There are people in this congregation that own luxury vehicles. And so I'm not saying this is your heart. I'm just saying these are things that we have to check and we have to evaluate about ourselves. But those can be perceived by other people as a status symbol. So whether or not your motives are pure, other people might look at that and say, well, I can't have a relationship with that person because they're at this level and I'm not. So it's possible. Anything else you can think of? Yeah? Anyone? A house, okay, yeah. This stately mansion, right? And somebody else, they're just doing all they can, right, to pay rent every month in their studio apartment. And they come over and you have this, palatial estate in their mind in comparison. And so again, it's not just about the thing itself, it's about your heart and how you use it as well. And so maybe that nice home that you have, people know, I may live in a studio apartment, but this is available to me. They open their home, and this is something that we can all experience and benefit from, and they're not focused on themselves. I think that can be a different thing. We can make things that we have accessible to others. And when there's accessibility, oftentimes there's not this barrier of, that's their status symbol. It's, this is available for all of us, and it's kind of nice to have that friend who has a nicer home that we can come over to, or it's kind of nice to have a friend who has a boat that will take me out on that boat to experience that. It's kind of nice, versus if somebody reserves it for themselves, sometimes it becomes a barrier. Here's some other things that might fall into that category in our lives, and some of it's by generations. Maybe if you're a Gen Xer or you're a boomer generationally, it's having multiple properties that become that status symbol. Maybe it's having a financially secure retirement or having a senior position in your career field. Or maybe it is a luxury vehicle or fine watches and fine jewelry or designer fashions or having a college savings fund for your kids. Not that those things are bad in and of themselves, but if they become conversation topics and points of comparison and things that separate you from other people, maybe those things are not doing that good and beneficial thing that you assumed they might be doing. And so maybe it's time to adjust that. If you're a younger generation, maybe it's something like having a remote job that pays really well, right? I can work from anywhere. I can work from the back of a van at a campsite in someplace rural as long as I've got Starlink internet. What do you have? You're working at McDonald's, I've got this flexibility. Maybe I'm driving the latest EV, Tesla or Rivian EV. Maybe it's having an iPhone Pro Max of the latest generation, or a certain number of social media followers on my account, or sustainable and ethical fashions, or international travel opportunities. And we talk about these things, and for us, maybe they cross the line into becoming a status symbol. They're not benefiting others, but they're just benefiting us, and they really form barriers with people who have less privilege, or they're viewed as pride. Or maybe we're using it to project something that we feel like we lack or make up for our own personal insecurity. And even if we're not trying to accumulate these things to flaunt our superior worth, again, it might seem that way to other people, and it might actually form barriers that we're not aware of. That's just something that we have to think about, especially living in our culture and our society, where having those things is kind of like, part of what society tells you need to be successful. So we just have to process, what we're doing and think about our motives and think if we're able to share those things with others or if it's something that's becoming a barrier, and we have to assess that in our own heart, with the Lord. Third thing that becomes an aspect of arrogance for Joseph are actually some claims that he makes. And maybe sometimes we make statements that to us, like they just seem normal, but to other people they come across as kind of prideful or arrogant. It says, then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. And here's what the dream was. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. There we were, binding sheaves of grain in the field, and suddenly my sheaf, my bundle of grain, it stood up, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down before my sheaf. Oh, this is going over well, especially with the tattletale 17-year-old kid brother and the luxury coat that he pulls out in every opportunity he has, right? This dream is just adding fuel to the fire. He could have kept his mouth shut and said nothing, but instead, he's got to tell his brothers about this one. Are you really going to rule over us and reign over us, his brothers asked him. So they hated him even more because of his dream and what he had said. Again, is this fostering relationships or is pride getting in the way? It's obviously causing problems, right? It's getting in the way. So instead of keeping his potential for success to himself, and maybe it's legitimate, and you find out from reading the story it actually is. There's a point in time where these dreams become prophetic and they actually happen. His brothers do actually bow before him and he is placed in a position over them. And so maybe you look at your life and you think, wow, like I've got a lot of potential for success. I created this little company, but you know what? We might be able to sell this thing for a couple $1 million. That's going to change our life. But maybe that's not something that you share with your friend who's struggling just to pay the bills every single month, right? There's reason and there's tact. There's things that we have to kind of balance our conversations and our claims with. And at this point in Joseph's life, he doesn't have that kind of balance or that kind of foresight. So he is just bragging about a dream that his brothers will someday bow down to his authority. And even though it might come to be true, it's not necessarily the most beneficial things for relationships at that moment to brag about that. And it's still in the land of potential. He doesn't know for sure what this dream means or how it's going to play out. And sometimes we might see potential in our own lives, but we really don't have anything in our hand yet. We don't know how it's going to play out. So maybe instead of bragging about what might be, we should just hang on to it and keep it more personal and more private, or at least be more humble in the way that we talk about it. And his lack of tact and humility really reveals his own immaturity. There's a sketch, and I don't necessarily want to condone every single sketch that Saturday Night Live does in their career, but there's one that stood out to me over the years. And this was called The One-Upper. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this skit before or seen it before, but in The One-Upper skit, there's a scene of friends that are chatting casually about some different things that they've been experiencing in life lately. And one of the characters is a compulsive one-upper. Her name is Penelope. And so a couple of the friends, they're talking, and one says, you know, we just got back from Hawaii. It was such an amazing trip. And Penelope jumps in really fast and says, oh yeah? I actually live in Hawaii part-time on a volcano. I built my own house from lava. And everybody just rolls their eyes like, okay. And then somebody gets back to the conversation, you know, wow, well, our hotel on this trip, it had a great infinity pool, and it was overlooking the ocean in Hawaii, and Penelope jumps back in. Yeah, my pool actually is the ocean. I just swim with dolphins every morning. They braid my hair. I'm fluent in dolphin. You know, and the conversation goes on. And later, somebody changes the topic because obviously vacation's not sitting real well. And they say, well, you know what? We're expecting our first baby. Penelope chimes in. Yeah, I'm actually pregnant with like twins. Actually, triplets. Actually, I'm the first person to ever give birth to myself. And so it's just like, you know that things are ridiculous. I had a conversation with my 8-year-old son a week ago, and he said, Dad, two of my friends always lie to me. They always tell me about stuff that I know is not true. Like they're trying to claim that they do stuff that they're really not doing. And I can see through it. And I was like, yeah, sometimes people say things like that just to kind of make themselves seem better than they really are, right? To encourage themselves, or maybe they're feeling insecure, other things behind that. But at the heart of this, pride sometimes is we end up lacking tact and humility, and it's just a sign of our own immaturity. And maybe we're carrying things about, things through our life that cause us to feel like we have to show ourselves to be better than what we really are, make claims that are beyond, or just inflate things a little bit. And that really comes across, again, as prideful, and it's something that gets in the way of our relationships with people. Says then he had another dream. Oh boy, we're on a good track here. And told it to his brothers. Look, he said, I had another dream. And this time the sun, moon, and 11 stars, he had 11 brothers, were bowing down to me. He told his father and brothers, and his father rebuked him. What kind of dream is this that you've had, he said. Am I and your mother and your brothers really going to come and bow down to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, right? Like they hadn't been previously, but this just, again, adds fuel to the fire. But his father kept the matter in mind. So his father is mature enough to say, well, I wonder if there's something to this. But ultimately, his father rebukes him and says, you're being a little arrogant for a 17-year-old kid coming and making these claims. And so he dishonors his parents by sharing another dream that presumes he will outshine their greatness. And maybe sometimes our prideful claims take the form of presumptions. We just assume certain things. Well, surely this will happen. And we talk about it in ways that actually cause offense to other people. I want to kind of close our time this morning by just looking at one third question when it comes to claims that we make. What are some things that we might claim that would project arrogance to somebody else? Maybe you're not a constant one-upper, you don't have that serious of a problem, but it's just certain things that you say and people around you look at you and think, you're kind of arrogant. They would never tell you to your face, but maybe it's even your spouse. They're like, it just sits wrong. Maybe it's one of your kids. I don't know. But here are some things people might claim or say that project arrogance. Common sense, it's just not very common these days. Think about it. How many of you have said that? Don't raise your hand, right? I've heard so many people say that in conversations. But what you're really saying is like, I know what common sense is, but all these people are clueless, right? Maybe you could say something like, everybody sees things through their own experiences, and it's easy to forget that. Or maybe you're somebody you say, I always see the big picture. I can't stand how some people just are so clueless. They can't see the big picture. Or you could say something like, I tend to think about the big picture, but I realize that there's value at looking at the details as well. I value the details that some people catch. Maybe it's something like, well, people my age just have more wisdom. Once you get to my age, I don't know what these younger generations are thinking, but we just have more wisdom. You could say something like, well, experience has taught me a lot, but I'm still learning from younger folks too. Okay, that's a little more humble. If people worked as hard as I do, they could have what I have too, right? You look around, you see somebody who's really struggling, or maybe somebody even who's transient or homeless, and you think, well, if they would have done what I did, they would have a better life, and so I don't need to take pity on them because they had the same opportunity that I had. That's the assumption. If they would have worked hard, they'd have it. Maybe you could say something like, hard work helps, but opportunities and support make a big difference. Because maybe there are some people who have come in or some opportunities that came your way that allowed you to get the things that you have that you've just failed to recognize. Maybe you say something like, I don't need to worry about money like most people. But it comes across as arrogant to people who do have to worry about money, right? Maybe you could say something like, well, I'm thankful to be in a stable place financially, and I realize not everybody is. I'd never let my kid act like that, right? These things hit home, don't they? Or you could say something like, parenting can be tough. I try not to judge what I don't fully understand. That might be a little more humble. Parents just don't know how to raise kids these days. You could say, well, every family situation is different. What works for one family, it might not work for another. kids these days just don't respect their elders. Maybe you could say, well, times have changed. Maybe kids express themselves differently now. Or, I've been through more than most people. You could say, I've faced some hard times, but they've taught me to have empathy for people. You'll understand when you're older, right? You could say it might make more sense with time. I had somebody tell me when I was a youth pastor, like Jack alluded to, it was not Jack. But I had a parent come up to me and say, when you're a parent, you'll see things the way we see things. And it was over a particular movie that I had taken some youth group people to. It wasn't a bad movie, but just something where for them, they wouldn't go see that movie. When you're a parent, you'll see things the way we see things. I'm a parent now. I have a 12-year-old. I still don't see things the way they saw things. It's just reality. But people think, I'm the one that knows, right? But it's more than that. Let's see. I have higher standards. I've seen it all. I'd never live there. I don't watch TV, or I don't spend much time on social media. Right? All those statements are telling people who do, right? Maybe that they're lesser. I only eat at real restaurants that serve organic food. Or I don't need religion. I know right from wrong. I know how to treat people. Instead of, I can't stand fake people. You could say I really value sincerity and I try to be genuine. Or, this would be really arrogant, but if everybody were like me, the world would be a better place. Maybe you'd never say that. Those are those kinds of things that you normally don't say, you just think, right? You could say, well, I hope to make my corner of the world a better place in my own way, right? There are a lot of things that we say to ourselves or to other people that really, they come across as arrogant and they separate us from people. They lack humility. And there's oftentimes a better way to phrase that thought that still is respectful to other people who might think or see differently. And so that's what we're trying to incorporate. We're trying to learn from Joseph and not pull a page from his playbook in these ways. But sometimes our claims can become very arrogant. Our clothes or other status symbols can project arrogance, even if it's not our heart, especially if we don't welcome other people into those things and we don't share those resources with people. We just consume them or use them to flaunt our superiority to other people. And then even our criticisms. If you have a tendency to be a very critical person, not that you're necessarily trying to be prideful, but you see the flaws in things. And this is one of my personality traits that I have to be careful of. I see the problems that exist in things down the road, and if I'm too quick to shoot down other people's ideas, it comes across as pretty arrogant and prideful. And so we have to just adjust the way that we interact with people so we don't come across that way. We come across with more tact, with more humility in the things we say, the criticisms or even constructive criticisms that we make, and the things that we wear or possess. Because if we're not careful, arrogance can be one of those things that disrupts our relationships with each other. So I just want to make us aware again of that this morning. Let's go ahead and pray today as we close.